So on January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan is going to be inaugurated. 2 months and 10 days later, Ronald Reagan is going to get shot in the lung. This solidifies Ronald Reagan as the President of the United States. Now the USians will adore 1984's Big Brother. This turns Ronald Reagan into a rock star, turns him into a political god. So Ronald Reagan becomes president just after Jimmy Carter, after Gerald Ford, after Nixon, before Papa Bush, before Bill Clinton, before Baby Bush, and then, I guess, Barack Obama, and then Donald Trump, right? So January 20th, 1981, Ronald Reagan is inaugurated. Now, March 30th, 1981, John Hinckley Jr. is going to shoot and wound Ronald Reagan with a ROM RG 14-22 caliber blue steel revolver gun. As Ronald Reagan was returning to his limousine after a speaking engagement at the Washington Hilton Hotel in D.C. Apparently, John Hinckley Jr. was trying to impress Jodie Foster, who he didn't know, but he had a crush on the Hollywood actress. John Hinckley Jr. shot 6 times in 1.7 seconds, missing Ronald Reagan directly with all 6 shots. But one bullet ricocheted and hit Ronald Reagan. It ricocheted off the side of the presidential limousine, hit Ronald Reagan in the left underarm, breaking a rib and puncturing a lung, causing serious internal bleeding. Ronald Reagan was close to death upon arrival at the George Washington University Hospital, but he was stabilized in the emergency room after the emergency room exploratory surgery, and he recovered, released from the hospital April 11th, 10 days later. So John Hinckley Jr. had read in the newspaper of Ronald Reagan's schedule, and he was just waiting for him at a rope line at one of these events, right as he was, leaving some sort of speaking engagement at the Washington Hilton Hotel. So as he was leaving the event, John Hinckley Jr. was standing in a rope line, waiting for Ronald Reagan to, get into his limo to go back to the White House. So immediately after, let's see, you're going to have a lot of stuff that's going to happen. You're going to see the guy pulls out the gun, special agent in charge. Jerry Parr is going to shove Ronald Reagan into the limousine to get him out of danger and into the car. Jerry Parr is the special agent in charge. He grabbed Ronald Reagan by the shoulders and then dove with him toward the open rear door of the limousine. And Agent Ray Shattuck had also did the same thing, throwing both Ronald Reagan and Jerry Parr into the car. So you had 2 men trying to get Ronald Reagan into the limousine. The first shot is going to hit James Brady, the press secretary, in his head. Just above the left eye, passed through underneath his brain, shattering his brain cavity. Is that the same thing as his skull or something else? It seriously injures James Brady, permanently disabling him, an injury which eventually kills him in 2014. Regular policeman Thomas K. Delahunty was shot in the neck. Thomas Delahunty had heard the shot, turned around to identify the shooter, and that's when he got shot in the neck by the second shot, and he shouts out, "I'm hit!" Thomas Delahunty shouts, "I'm hit!" Alfred Antonucci, a Cleveland, Ohio labor official who was standing nearby, he starts fighting with John Hinckley Jr. So you have a Cleveland, Ohio labor official standing nearby, punching John Hinckley in the head, began to wrestle the shooter down to the ground. Because of Jerry Parr and Ray Shattuck shoving Ronald Reagan into the limousine, and Alfred Antonucci fighting with John Hinckley Jr., John Hinckley's Jr.'s first shot goes over Ronald Reagan's head. Tom McCarthy snapped his attention to the sound of the gunfire, pivoted to his right, and he put himself in the line of fire. Tim McCarthy spread his arms and his legs, taking a wide stance directly in front of Ronald Reagan and Parr to make himself a target. And the fourth bullet goes into Tim McCarthy's chest, into his right lung, his diaphragm, and right lobe of the liver. The fifth round hit the bullet-resistant glass of the window on the open rear door of the limo as Ronald Reagan was passing behind it. The sixth bullet is the one that's going to hit him. It's going to ricochet off the armor side of the limo, passing between the space of the open rear door and the vehicle frame, and hit the president in the left underarm. The round grazed the rib and lodged in his lung, causing it to partially collapse before stopping less than an inch from his heart. So apparently it did not crack or break a rib. It, passed it. So Jerry Parr shoving Ronald Reagan I think he did get a cracked rib, but he's going to get shot in the lung. And it's going to partially collapse, and it stops. The bullet stops less than 1 inch from Ronald Reagan's heart. All 6 shots were fired in less than 2 seconds, 1.7 seconds. At first, nobody in America knew that Ronald Reagan had been shot because he's going to, it was the last bullet as he was pushed into the limo, and then they're going to, get away from the scene. Just barely got shot as the door closed, as the door was closing. So Ronald Reagan, he thought that he had actually cracked a rib. He believed Ronald Reagan believed he cut his lip. But Jerry Parr thought he cracked a rib, and he's the one that punctured his lung because Ronald Reagan starts coughing up bright, frothy blood in the limo. So Jerry Parr says, to the limo driver, go to the George Washington University Hospital. The limo arrives there 4 minutes after leaving the hotel, while other agents took Hinckley to D.C. jail. Jerry Parr requested a stretcher, but there wasn't one there at the George Washington Hospital when they got there, so Ronald Reagan insisted on walking himself. Ronald Reagan gets out of the limo. Ronald Reagan gets out of the limo, and he acts all cool and casual, and he's smiling at the onlookers as he walked into the hospital. And he enters the hospital unassisted, but once he gets inside the hospital, Ronald Reagan complains about having difficulty breathing. His knees buckle, and he goes down on one knee. Jerry Parr and others help Ronald Reagan to the emergency room department. Doctors are going to cut off Ronald Reagan's $1,000 custom-made suit to examine him. Ronald Reagan's wallet was in that suit. The FBI took his suit and his wallet as evidence, and it contained the gold codes. The codes for the nuclear launch. The FBI eventually is going to return the gold codes 2 days later. Military officers tried to prevent the FBI from taking Ronald Reagan's wallet. As evidence, when Ronald Reagan met up with his wife, Nancy, at the hospital, he said, "Honey, I forgot to duck," apparently borrowing from Jack Dempsey's line to his wife the night he was beaten by Gene Tunney. In the operating room, Ronald Reagan made another joke. He takes off his oxygen mask and he says, I hope you are all Republicans. Giordano, a liberal Democrat, the head doctor, told Ronald Reagan, "Today, Mr. President, we are all Republicans." ABC, NBC, CBS all reported that Jim Brady had died. The curse of Tippecanoe was brought up, the 20-year presidential curse since 1840. William Henry Harrison was elected until 1960 when JFK was elected. Apparently, every 20 years, there's a pattern of deaths when it comes to the presidents. The curse was issued by Tecumseh's brother, Tenskwatawa, upon William Henry Harrison in 1840. So the curse of Tippecanoe was brought up. Eventually, it's going to go to a federal trial, and Jodie Foster was subpoenaed to testify, I guess, to deny that she knew. John Hinckley Jr. Hinckley has been released from the psych ward. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He's going to go to a psych ward. He was actually released 30-something odd years later, September 10th, 2016. John Hinckley Jr. must live full-time with his mother in Williamsburg, Virginia. John Hinckley Jr. can't have any alcohol, guns, weapons, pictures of Jodie Foster, nor can he contact Jodie Foster, nor Reagan's, nor Brady's family. He can't even speak to the press, and he can't have certain violent magazines and TV and music, nor any porn. So the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan was March 30th, 1981. The economy was good in March. It was good in January. It was good in February, March, April, May, June. July is when the 1981 recession is going to begin, 6 months into Ronald Reagan's presidency. This looks to me like a shock doctrine of disaster capitalism. So the 1981 recession, this is a 1-year, 4-month recession starting July 1981 and ending in November 1982. 1 year, 4 months. It's totally a recession, totally not a depression. But there was the first 6 months of 1980 in Jimmy Carter's administration was a recession too. And then there was 1 year of growth, and then there's the Reagan-Volcker recession, July 1981. A comparison of Jimmy Carter's half-year recession in 1980 and the 1981 and 82 recession, I think, is warranted to see what's the continuity between the two. But this is focused on Reagan's recession, the consistent 1.25 years. It had a longer continuity under one administration, and it was very, particular, and it was direct, and it was deliberate. So let's see. A recession is, the definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters that you had a decline in GDP, gross domestic product, the total of all the goods produced in the country. So, the number one main reason for the 1981 recession was the high federal funds rate, intentionally set by the Federal Reserve Chairman, Volcker. I won't say Paul, Volcker is his last name, in order to combat inflation. This was intentionally done. Ronald Reagan intentionally induced the recession to fight inflation. They knew what they were doing, and they were okay with it. So Ronald Reagan and Volcker and everybody that was, they were willing to let many workers lose their jobs because unemployment is going to, rise. This is the shock doctrine. Ronald Reagan was making the economy of America scream, just like what America did with Pinochet, Chicago boys in Chile in the 1970s. So inflation is a tax. The inflation, apparently a Ronald Reagan talking point is that it hurts the elderly disproportionately. So inflation is a tax, and, listen up, old people, this hurts you the most. So Ronald Reagan was going to let the economy take a beating in order to combat, in order to fight inflation. And it's going to work. The inflation is going to go down. It was 15%, and in 1983 it's going to be at 5%. So it was at double digits, right? 15% inflation. Inflation was getting up there. So to fight inflation, you contract the money supply. You don't necessarily have to raise the federal funds rate to combat inflation, but that's what Ronald Reagan did. So the federal funds rate got up to 21.5% during the Volcker recession, the Volcker-induced intentional recession. The Federal Reserve's contractionary monetary policy to rein in high inflation. Generally, in 1975, inflation was 8%, 9%, in 1975. So to go up to 15%, inflation was on the rise. Yeah, Paul Volcker, Federal Reserve Chairman, slowed the rate of growth of the money supply, and he raised the federal funds rate. And perhaps maybe they're, raising the federal funds rate would probably contract the money supply. The interest rate at which depository institutions, banks, credit unions, savings and loans, banks lend reserve balances to other depository institutions overnight on an uncollateralized basis. It's the transfer fee the Fed issues whenever one bank transfers funds to another bank. So this is the price that the Fed puts on one bank transfers funds to another bank electronically. Somehow the Fed gets some money. The Federal Reserve gets the federal funds rate whenever one bank transfers funds to another bank. So the federal funds rate is an important benchmark in financial markets. It was 11% in 1979, 20% in June of 1981. The prime interest rate is going to reach 21.5% June 1982. The prime interest lending rate is an interest rate used by banks, I think, to index. It's the best interest rate the bank can offer to their best customers or ones with good credit. The prime interest rate is used as an index in calculating rate changes for the ARM, the adjustable rate mortgage, and other variable rate short-term loans, private student loans, credit cards, and home equity lines of credit. August 5th, 1981, Ronald Reagan is going to fire 17,000 air traffic controllers on strike by executive action in the name of national security. This signals to the unions and the working class there is no hope. Income inequality. You have no leverage with your bosses anymore. Without the unions, what leverage? You're just going to have to kiss the boss's ass till the day you die. Income inequality is going to exacerbate the situation. Poor education, racism. There's not universal health care in America in 1981. There's not universal basic income. There's no social safety net for the general population. Also, no ranked choice voting, no real democracy, police brutality. The 1980s brought us AIDS, which Ronald Reagan ignored for years. Ronald Reagan also had an aggressive economy, some program. He wanted lots of tax cuts. He proposed a 10% across the board in personal income tax rates for each of the next 3 years. He also proposed an accelerated depreciated allowances to allow for necessary capital to create jobs. Accelerated depreciated allowances. So you know what, this economy, we got to accelerate the depreciated allowances. That gives us a necessary capital. You know, wham, bam, thinking, man, now we got some jobs here. We got some jobs. All you got to do is accelerate the depreciated allowance. So that's what he said in some speech. So he did a lot when it comes to the economy. I think Ronald Reagan being at the helm probably shocked the economy by itself. Him getting shot and injured and then sustaining it and actually being, jovial and then walking and being, strong, mind character. He's going to go on and run America for the next 8 years. So he just got into office, right? Whether you liked him or didn't, right? He just got elected. So Republicans, Democrats, they were all about Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter just got kicked out. Mr. Peanut Farmer, right? Mr. Legalized Marijuana, Mr. Solar Power, solar panels on the rooftops of the White House, Mr. I never dropped a bomb anywhere in America. But Mr. Weak, when it came to the Iran hostage situation, which did Reagan make a deal, in order, so anyways, he's got an aggressive economic policy. He's very particular. He's the one that comes in and says, government is the problem, which is laissez-faire, free market capitalism, which is the problem with Herbert Hoover in the 1929 Great Depression. That's the problem with the 1837 panic. So many depressions, so many recessions happened because they took a non-governmental interventionist approach. Nixon says we're all Keynesians now, and specifically a Keynesian just means that you believe in government intervention to save the economy. So if there's a recession or depression, I'm in favor of that, if they do it properly and they do it right. But I want them to, rescue Americans, the regular, ordinary, average, working class, the homeowners, the 350 million, the people of America, not just the elite and the 1%. So, yeah, the federal funds rate, they induced it intentionally. They took it all the way up to, 21.5%. Inflation was at 15%. And so they, combated inflation, took it down to 3% by 1983. They were successful, but they're going to lose millions of jobs. 10, 20 million jobs or some shit. It's going to be up to 8 or 9%, 11% unemployment.